Hi friends, this is Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight, and today I'd like to go over this presentation regarding the Snapshot Protocol. Snapshot Protocol allows us to really get a careful review of our elections process and eliminate or reduce the chance that the election will be manipulated through central tabulator election fraud. Now, as you know, we've had a lot of problems and this last election, there was a lot of people suspecting that something was done. Let me tell you, this is nothing new. It seems like every election we think about the same thing. And it has been proven now that in 2001 and 2004, and probably all the recent elections, things that have been funny business going on in the vote counting process. So essentially, we're going to be quickly going over a bit of background about Citizens Oversight, and then going over the how the ballots are processed and how election fraud can occur, and how the Snapshot Protocol can actually prevent it, and then what we need to do to implement that and to deploy it. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We are a charity, so you get tax deduction when you give us a donation. We do appreciate your donations because that helps us fund what we're doing. Remember, the most important office in a democracy is that of the citizen. Quote by Supreme Court Justice Brandeis. I really think this is an important thing to understand. We can't rely upon our elected officials to do oversight of our elections. We have to be involved, and we have to be the final oversight entities to make sure that everything is going correctly, because if we don't, then they will manipulate these elections to their heart's content. We did a top-to-bottom review in the 2008 to 2010 time period, published a big report about what was wrong with San Diego Registrar voters, and since then have gone in to design this Snapshot Protocol to allow us to conduct, really do a good job of providing oversight over the 1% manual tally procedure, which is it's a great tool for us. We need to make sure that we're handling it right, because right now we're not. In all canvassing methods, that is counting up the votes and deciding who won the election, oversight is a requirement to avoid election fraud. You have to have it, and it's really missing. There is no real systematic methodology for oversight, and that's the void that we're trying to fill in Citizens Oversight. Electronic systems make it difficult. We do want durable paper ballots if at all possible, and there are areas that are currently using electronic voting machines such as touchscreen machines, and those areas the voters can actually ask for a durable paper ballot instead, and they're required to give it to them if they have them. So in places such as Orange County, which are using primarily in the precincts these touchscreen machines, those can be, you can ask for a paper ballot and get it at the precinct. This is a pretty complex diagram, so we're going to pull it apart in a minute, but this is basically the election process on one page, in terms of having votes coming in from the precincts, votes coming in from the vote by mail process, and then the processing down here. And the yellow part is what we're going to be doing in the Snapshot Protocol to observe it. I'm going to be stepping through this and by looking at each section. So at the polls, when you walk up and in person you vote, these are at some in San Diego, some 1,522 precincts in 2016, and you vote in the precincts. There are issues in the precincts in terms of provisionals and so forth. We're not going to try to get into that here. This is only about the Snapshot Protocol of making sure we don't have massive election fraud in the central tabulator. So they are, by and large, voted in San Diego. They use mostly paper ballots in the precincts. Very, very few people use the touchscreen machines. This is what we need to have happen in other counties. Then they're brought into incoming inspection, and some ballots are removed if they're mutilated or there's some issues where they can see that it's not going to make it through the scanner. And then you have these grouped up. Now when they come into the precincts, they are all grouped together in the precinct. They come in at the same time in boxes. So so they're easy to scan and keep together in the precinct. It's pretty hard to manipulate an election in this phase of it. All the talk about voter fraud and people trying to impersonate someone, or that they need an ID to get in and so forth. Very, very few. It's going to be very hard to really fix an election unless you're able to convince thousands and thousands of people to be fraudulent. So really, all of those things are just diversion factors from the reality of what we need to be talking about here. We do need to be aware of the as these ballots are brought in, there's chain of custody issues. The whole chain of custody, making sure the ballots are secure, having tamper evidence seals with numbers and another system to catalog those numbers. That's something they're not doing right either. But it's something, it's done half-baked so far. We need to make sure it's done a little bit better. But we need to probably watch during transportation to make sure that they're brought in. This is all that we can do on this part of it. And here's incoming inspection when they come in from the polls. They're taken out of the boxes. Just a picture from the old facility in San Diego. Now, after they come in, here's the ballots as they're coming in from the polls. They go through a scanner here, and there's a whole bunch of scanners that they use in San Diego. After they're scanned, the ballots are kept together in their precincts and then put into storage. And that's another area we want to make sure that it's secure and that they're not fiddling with the ballots in any way before we go through the audit. Memory cards from each one of these precincts that scan. So they get a paper tape that says 0, and then they scan them and they can print out another paper tape that gives you the results of that for that precinct, and that's put into a folder envelope. And we've been able to actually go in and take a look at those tapes. In our audit of San Diego, we took a look at 85 precincts, or 5% of the precincts, and they did match up what the audit log said was coming into the central tabulator. But what happens after that is something that it's hard to really keep track of, whether they manipulated it after it went into the central tabulator. We're seeing a side come in here, the vote by mail ballots. They come in and they start processing 10 days in advance. So this is an area we really need to improve. We need to be at the registrar of voters, watching them 10 days before the election to watch them how they handle these vote by mail ballots as they come in. It's an awful lot of time to sit there and be able to fiddle with the ballots. And this other process of going to the precinct, they're all kept in the boxes and they can't do much to them. They have those 10 days to do it, and they come in mixed precinct batches. So when they come into the central tabulator, they may be precinct by precinct if they've been pre-sorted, or they may be in mixed precinct batches. So we need to be aware of that. Now in San Diego, they do the scanning all in one place in the central office, and you can see people here that are still using these precinct type scanners, which were designed to be used in the precinct and scan the ballots as they were brought, as they were voted. But there was too much opportunity for hackers perhaps to manipulate those, and so the Secretary of State, Deborah Bowen, said they're not going to be able to do that anymore, so they brought these all into the central office. They still process the ballots as if they were in the precinct. So one of these temporary workers will feed them one by one into the precinct scanner and then get the tape, but then there's a memory card that they bring in to be read in. So here's some other scanners that are used just to read those memory cards, and that goes into the central tabulator, which is just a computer that you can see here, running a special type of software called GEMS. That in San Diego there's different types, but this software essentially, this is an opportunity here to, with a few clicks of the button, to move massive numbers of votes from one candidate to another. And so if you were a hacker or compromised employee, there's a possibility that you could do things here, and that's one thing we want to make sure that we're watching, and that's how we're using the manual tally for that. Now, a bit more detail on vote by mail. When it comes in, they do a signature comparison. They're supposed to only compare the signatures. Sometimes they've also been looking at addresses, making sure that the apartment number doesn't match, and so let's throw it out. basically they're not supposed to do address checking at all, just a signature check. It's okay if you move. And so they check signature, compare it, and then they're supposed to also now send a letter back if your signature, if you forgot to sign it or if your signature doesn't match, send a letter back to say there's something wrong with your signature. We want you to come in and do it again. So, but that's new, and I don't know how many people are actually being able to respond to it. It's something we need to look at. I was saying here that we don't implement snapshot protocol on this vote by mail thing because it's done because we're not getting the snapshot in advance, but that's only for the vote by mail ballots that came in later. The ones that came in before election night, we should be able to do the snapshot protocol, get the snapshot file right away, and then in subsequent vote by mail ballots that are processed in batches, we should be able to also get the snapshot file for those as well and implement the oversight protocol just as well. They're saying now that they can't do it, and that's the reason for our lawsuit, to make sure that all of these ballots are included in the audit process. So the 1% manual tally, they go through the central tabulator here. We get an election night report. At 8 p.m., the first results come out. Those are results only from the vote by mail ballots that were processed early. The election night report is those ballots at the end of the night and all the polls ballots that were processed from the precincts. Those are all scanned and included in the election night report. That's one thing that we're going to be getting as a snapshot file from. You'll see in a second. Then they do the 1% selection after they make the report. Very important that the report is fixed, so it can't be changed based on which ones they chose. If they did manipulate the election, first of all, you don't want this precinct selection to occur before the election, and some counties are doing that, such as Fresno and Imperial. They're doing it months in advance, and then any hacker could just avoid those precincts and fix the rest. If it's done afterwards, what we need to make sure is that we get a fixed data file so that they can't go back and undo any changes that they may have made. Then they do the 1% manual tally, and then we can take a look at the report. So it's a very, very good thing in California that we get the 1% tally process, and that it includes all races, not just a few selected races. Some states do it that way. So we send a letter to the registrar, usually a month or two in advance, telling them what our process is going to be. The fact that we want them to give us a data file, and then after that, choose their precincts randomly. And most important thing here is not that it's random. A lot of people get too hung up on whether it's absolutely random. The main thing is that it's a surprise. They can't tell which precinct are going to be chosen. That's the concept of random that we're interested in. Not just that it's just a random distribution, but they already know. That eliminates the whole concept. Then, so we send that letter in, and what we do, again, this is sort of hard to read because I need to change it, but we have this, when they make this election night report, we want to get a CD or the data uploaded to our server. And then we do some data reduction, and then we do a comparison. Now what we've done is we've sent letters to every county in the state asking for them to cooperate with our process, and not all of them have done it yet. That's why we need to establish teams throughout the rest of the state to help us with that. Here's a picture of the transfer of the CD happening in San Diego in a prior election, and then we also went through watching and video recording the selection process and making sure that, if possible, they're choosing from amongst all of the ballots, not just the ones that came in as of election night. So we really need to push that, and that's the subject of our lawsuit, to make sure that we're getting them all included. Excuse me. The manual tally process occurs over a number of days or weeks, and you see the temporary workers here working diligently, usually in teams of 3 with 2 talliers and 1 reader. we video recorded this and carefully watched it, and I encourage you to do it as well, especially as they finish each one of these. What do they do? How do they deal with any variances? Do they just rerun them through the scanners and say everything is fine? Well, this is a problem in our view. Let's cover that in a second. The data file that you get, the snapshot file, does need to have some reduction. You have to sort of leaf through it. It's too big to put on into a regular spreadsheet program typically. And so we do have some software that will help us convert that so that it's something that can be manipulated. It is also not too difficult to just go through it by hand and pull out the data that's included in the 1% tally process. Now, red flags. Let's say that this is a common thing that they're doing in San Diego. That, oh, well, there's a difference between the 1% tally, hand tally, and the machine scans. Well, let's just run it back through the machine, and then it works out fine. Well, then they say, well, everything's fine now. Actually, that means that it isn't fine. That means that you actually detected potentially election fraud, because if there's a significant difference in even one of those precincts that was chosen in the 1% manual tally, if there's a significant difference, then it may have been, if they can't explain it, it's a misfeed or a double scan or something like that, or a marking that wasn't read correctly. If they can't explain it, it's just a big difference, then this is a sign that there may have been election fraud. Somebody who's gone in and just massively changed the results inside the central tabulator. Let's say we don't find any discrepancies, but the results of the manual tally are way off from the actual result of the election. This is another possibility that they've gone in and were able to fix those precincts, or choose those particular precincts and escape possible detection. Then this is a possibility that maybe they've unmodified them from the data file. But if we have the snapshot file, it should eliminate this possibility. Now, in this case, I don't know if this is number 2, but maybe it could be called number 3. In this last election, we had some very interesting results that did raise a red flag. In the polls ballots in this first line here, which is 190,000 ballots in San Diego, in the 1% manual tallied precincts, you can see that Bernie Sanders won by a landslide, and by 57.5 to 42.5 for Hillary Clinton. And in those same precincts, in the vote by mail ballots, it was basically reversed. I have been watching elections for a while, and I've never seen this dramatic of a change between the polling place ballots and the early vote by mail ballots. The other area of concern here is that the later process vote by mails and the provisionals are not even included in the set of, and you can see there's no data here. That's because we're not getting any 1% manual tally data for any of these two, because they're not included. Those 285,000, almost 40% of the election, are not being audited at all. So we go through the process here. We've sent a letter to every county asking them to comply with our snapshot protocol. Not all of them have done it. Some are very cooperative. We need teams in every possible district that we can find them in to help us, because there's no district that's too small unless you have one like Alpine, which only has one precinct, and that's too small to worry about. They're going to be manual tallying everything, and so there's no need for any snapshot file or anything like that. Well, I will show you the most important counties in a minute. Key here is 2 things. Get the snapshot file first and get it frozen. Number 2, then they should choose the random selection. That's the 2 things we need. We need them in that order. And we don't want them choosing the random selection 2 months ahead of the election or something like that. And we want to get everything included. Now, if they want to do it in a couple of steps of saying, okay, well, we're going to do just the polls ballots to start with, and then we're going to do batches of vote by mail ballots after that, we need to have a new random selection, so it's now a surprise for those subsequent batches, and then maybe they can do it in a two-step or multiple-step process. And in each case, you need to get a preliminary results, a snapshot file for everything. So in that snapshot file are all precincts, precinct by precinct, race by race, ballot type by ballot type, all broken down. That's the kind of thing that's in the snapshot file. And then afterwards, take a look at the results and see. Now, just the fact that we're implementing the snapshot protocol means that almost no one is going to really risk. It's not guaranteed to catch every type of election fraud, because with 1%, it's really not enough to do it. You really would only have a chance of detecting likely types of fraud maybe half the time. But with half the time chance of getting caught, I think that most people who might be entertaining election fraud would say, okay, we're not going to be able to do it because Citizens Oversight and the rest of the groups are actually watching us very, very carefully. There are some extensions that can be done afterwards in terms of making sure that the number of ballots that were printed match in terms of where the elections were held, seals, tracking the seals. We found 99 cases of broken or missing seals in San Diego. Do they follow them up? No, it turns out they just, the whole seal thing is just kind of just for show. So we want to try to take a look at that whole chain of custody, start looking at the vote by mail processing 10 days in advance. That's a new thing that we need to really work on. Now, where to implement this? First of all, not all states do a 1% manual tally, and some of them don't do a very good one. California has a pretty good 1% manual tally, and that includes all races, and it's mandated to be public, and it includes all the ballots. So they're not doing it right yet, and that's the reason for our lawsuit. But the law itself is pretty good. Other states have good laws. The state of New York is pretty good. We wanted to include that. And these states that you see, New York and Wisconsin, that are sort of dark, are the same darkness supposed to be as New Mexico. So we do have, it's either the purple ones or the sort of dark ones are doing a pretty good job. For example, in Arizona, they only use a few races, and they use 1% of the precincts only for a few races. So it's not that good, and it's done in private and not public enough for us to really catch stuff. But it's better than nothing, and all the white states have really nothing. But those are states we don't necessarily care about anyway. Here's the map of what we do really want to focus on. Red first, so the most important state, California, Texas, Florida, Ohio. These are big states with lots of voters, and if you just look at the top 10, that's more than half the voters in the country are in these 10 states. So we don't need to look at all the states to have a really, really big impact here. And if you just choose 20 states and not do all 50, leave out 30, you're getting more than 80% of the voters. And so with 80% of the voters covered with a protocol like this, it can really have a big impact. This is the sort of approach we want to take. We don't want to just blindly look at all states, but if a state that's not included here that does have a good manual tally wants to get involved, of course we want to work with them. California, this is an example of in each state that we take a look at. You also want to take a look at what are the most important counties, because they vary greatly. There are 58 counties in California that implement their own election process, and each one is like a little fiefdom unto itself. They don't really use many of the same processes at all. The top dozen are 76% of the voters. Okay, so if we just look at 12 counties, we can cover the vast majority of all the votes in California with the snapshot protocol. And if we go on for the next dozen, it's 91%. So basically 24 counties out of 58 and we can do a really, really good job of covering potential election fraud, especially for those statewide races such as the presidential race. For the smaller races, of course, we want to implement this everywhere, because sometimes those lower level races for city council or other seats are extremely important, and they need the same level of scrutiny. So really we need to have teams everywhere doing this, but looking at for statewide races the most important, let's look at these top 12, 30 dozen, and then move on to the next 12. Most important for us has been San Diego, because Michael Vu has a tainted history of working in Ohio when two of his subordinates were convicted of absentee voter fraud, basically stacking the deck of ballots so that they could pre-counting them during the audit, so they made sure that they matched so that they could avoid extra work, they said. But they were convicted, and then he went on to resign and then showed up in San Diego within 2 to 4 months, somewhat as a reward for his processing over there of getting Bush in for a second term in Ohio. So, so what we want to do is Citizens Oversight is reaching out to groups throughout the state in these most important counties, but really any county that wants to be involved. Of course, we want to work with you. We want teams in every election district to understand the process that they're going through and how to implement really good oversight, because I've heard a lot of talk about paper ballots and how it's auditable and so forth, but I haven't heard anyone really tell people, here's how you should go in and provide really good oversight to make sure that there's no election fraud happening in that central tabulator. The snapshot protocol, exactly what that does, and if we implement it around the state, we can have a really big impact. And then the COPS wants to be a central clearinghouse where we can help people in their local district with their issues, because every district is going to be a little bit different. How to get information, we know exactly how to do that so that we can get through, get past blocks from these elections officials and get the information so we understand what we can do with and make sure that these election officials are implementing the 1% manual tally properly. As I said, for us, getting that snapshot file, and then after that it's all fixed and frozen, getting the 1% selection done randomly in a surprise, and then also we need to make sure that the ballots are not being manipulated. So those three things. These are the links. I'd like to encourage you to go to citizensoversight/donate and make a contribution. We do need to ask for your help, a way to participate if you're not able to be on a team, or you'd like to participate in a larger way to help us roll this out, not only in California but in these other states. And if we do this right, we can basically eliminate a lot of the potential election fraud.